And good evening. You are listening to WXCU Radio.
I'm Maura.
And I'm Ryan.
And today we have a very special guest. We have Mike Shea, the CEO and founder of Alternative Press magazine.
Hey guys, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. We're getting busy up here for the year. We're already planning like 7-8 months in advance now, so I'm already thinking in August. So it's a little kind of a mind mess right now, but yeah, it's getting busy.
That sounds good. So my first question is, where are you calling from right now?
We're based up here in Cleveland. We actually started in Aurora, and then after like the first couple of years, then we moved to Cleveland Heights, and we worked out of my editor's apartment at the time, and so we kind of had a deal with him, like we rented half of his apartment, and our deal was that we could work there as late as we wanted to, but if he was coming home from a girl, we had to leave. And then we moved over to the west side of Cleveland into another apartment complex, and then we finally got a real office space in like 1993, and then we kind of moved into a big warehouse artist space about 8 years ago now, and so we've been very near downtown for this whole time. So.
Sounds good. So why did you start? Why did you want to start Alternative Press magazine?
I don't know. I guess you kind of like imagine like if the internet had nothing out there that was about your favorite bands, and all there was out there was about bands, genres of bands that you didn't like. And so it was kind of like how it was in 1985 in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, where we had a couple of small fanzines that we had one like old school punk fanzine, and they didn't like any of the new punks and new wavers or anything like that. And then we kind of had one, it was kind of a new fanzine for like new music, but they were really cynical. And so there wasn't really anything kind of bringing all the communities together on any one spot. And the local papers at the time and the radio stations didn't talk about our music unless it was college radio. And so I was going to Kent State, competitor, and I was going to I wanted to be a film director. And I came down with mono, and I got some weird virus in my right arm, and it basically attacked my peripheral nerve, and so it kind of sent like electrical shocks down my right arm, and the doctor misdiagnosed it because he thought I was I had pulled a muscle by carrying my book bag around college all day. It was like I was taking like 18 credit hours. It was nuts. So and I never wanted to go back to my car in the parking lot, so I kept all of my books in my bag. So I lost the use of my arm because it was misdiagnosed, and so all my muscles kind of atrophied, and I had to go through physical therapy. And when you lose your dominant hand, you kind of start to really appreciate it. So I actually took my history final in that year of college. It was a blue book test, and so I actually had to hold the pen, my hand closed over the pen so I could hold it upright and answer the questions, which was loads of fun. I'd been befriended this punk rock dude downtown Cleveland, and he was like really into the punk rock stuff, and so he kind of introduced me to a bunch of the other punks in town, and I got to kind of hang out with them, and having been the editor of the school newspaper and stuff like that, I was always a journalist at heart in a way, and Kent State came back and they shut down the film school because the one professor that ran it retired. And so I was sitting there in radio classes, learning about radio waves, and I didn't want to be a radio DJ, sorry. And so I was like, why am I sitting in college going to be a radio DJ when I don't want to do that? And so I kind of started a fanzine with my friend and a couple other friends, and we kind of wanted to make it like one spot that was like an alternative to the other press in town, which is where the name came from. It had nothing to do with alternative rock because in 1985, alternative rock didn't exist. There was no name for it. So we started this little fanzine, and we had 1,000 copies, and we handed it out for free. It looked like a high school newspaper. Because I knew advertisers had to take it seriously, so I had to make it not look too much like it was scrawled and put together. So we handed out 1,000 copies at a concert down at a punk rock show in the Flats, and got rid of them one night. I was actually not there. I was sick at home with a really, really bad cold or flu, and because it was pre-internet, I had no idea what happened. So, and texting, you had none of that. So, you didn't have cell phones. So I didn't find out till midday the day after that we got rid of all the copies when my friend who handed out all the copies woke up finally and decided to bother to call me. And all of a sudden we got contacted by kids in Columbus and Detroit and Pittsburgh, and they were all like, "Hey, we love your zine. We want to write for you. We want to do zine reports." And so we're like, "Cool." And so we had our first kind of staff meeting in Arabicas, and it used to be a coffee house, and it's actually where the grog shop is now in Gibbon Heights up here. And there's actually a copy of the very first issue and a plaque when you walk in the front door of the grog shop, kind of commemorating that. And then we used to have staff meetings at Denny's and stuff like that, real punk rock kind of places. And it just kind of grew from there. And because to kind of throw a little bit more drama for radio, we didn't know what the hell we were doing because we were 19, 20 years old, 18 years old, and I was 19. And I was just this kind of goth kid, in all honesty. I was never really a skater. I was a goth. And I was living at home in Aurora, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so we started spending more money than we were bringing in very quickly, and because we weren't being able to sell enough ads, and the paper was free at the time. So we started throwing punk rock concerts in the Variety Theater, which is still there in over on Lorraine Avenue here in Cleveland, right off 117th Street. And it's a very, very old vaudeville house / movie theater, and it had been closed. It had been bought in the 60s actually, by the one remaining segregationist school. People didn't want their kids going to school with African Americans, and so they owned this place, and nothing was going on in it, and so they rented it to us for dirt cheap, and it was $500 to rent a 3,000 capacity theater, and we would book kind of name punk rock bands. We had Suicidal Tendencies come in, and who else? Not GBA. Crap, can't remember all of them. It's been a while. And but we had 7 local bands play, and they were all small bands that were together for 2 weeks. And there was a guy in town, by name Mark, and he was a professional sound guy. And he actually went out at the time and toured and did all the sound for Barry Manilow and Alice Cooper and all these big, huge bands. So he knew everybody in town, and he befriended us, and he would go to the sound companies in town, and he would rent out for us at dirt cheap, state-of-the-art sound systems. And he would bring them into this old vaudeville house. And so you had all these punk bands that were playing on sound systems that they would never, ever play on ever again, probably. And so the first time they could actually hear how crappy they sounded. And so we packed a bunch of kids in that way, and we made some money from that, and that paid to keep AP going. And eventually the other promoters in town didn't like that we were starting to encroach on their territory, so they cross-promoted against us. And so basically what it means is they collude, and they go, all right, AP's got a show on Saturday, and they're going to try and get 500 kids. So we're going to book a show of a bigger band on Friday, and then you go book a band on a bigger band on Monday, and we'll take away their ticket sales. And so it eventually killed us, and we stopped. We couldn't give any more money, so we stopped doing AP for about a year. And then a year later, I went into doing retail, which sucked, and a year later, one of my record reviewers got a hold of me, and he was selling cars down in Barberton, Ohio. And he's like, hey, so how much would it be to do a reunion issue? And I kind of scrawled it out. I was like, maybe about $700, $800. He's like, I really miss doing it. And I said, yeah, I do too. And he's like, so why don't we do one? I'll front it, and we'll do one reunion issue. I'm like, okay, cool. So I kind of rounded up whoever was left in town, because some people had moved on and got out of whatever we were doing. And I got a hold of some record companies up in New York City and out in L.A. that we had worked with, and I said to them, hey, we're going to do a reunion issue. And they said, wow, you're back. And I'm like, why? And they said, well, this whole time you've been gone, we found out our magazine had been kind of distributed around the country at that point, and because of that, people had discovered it over that year and fell in love with it, and they really liked it, and they always wanted to know when we were going to make another issue or two. And so these record companies are like, we really want to support you, so we're going to buy all these ads. And so we made more sales money off of advertising that one issue coming back than we had all the previous 8, so plus. And so we were able to basically restart AP again, and started with issue number 9. in June of 1988, and then it just kind of went from there, and it's just been this long, crazy, up and down and all over the place trip for these past going on 30 years now. So this June 6th will be our 30th anniversary since that night, handing out 1,000 copies of that punk rock show. So there's the whole story.
Wow, thank you. So from those beginnings, how big is AP now? About like how many employees work for it?
We have about 17 employees here, and we have a bunch of freelancers, probably about 24 freelancers, and we have a couple contributing editors that are around the country, and we have writers and photographers that are in London and England, and we have a couple that we just brought on freelance over in Australia for us, and it's been a lot of work. We're starting to get into on-air correspondence and stuff like that. So we have APTV correspondence. We have one out in LA. We have one down in Nashville. We have one up in Vancouver that handles the Northwest area, and it's constantly changing, and it's really exciting in that sense because we're broadening out our website. We're actually going back and we're opening up the doors to our 30 years of covering alternative rock in all of its different formats and variations and subgenres. And so it's allowing us to actually go back to some of our original writers and say, hey, we want you to come back and write some stuff about old school punk or stuff from the early 90s and that. And so many writers now are out of work and don't get to write about stuff what they want to write about anymore. You're ecstatic about it. So it's definitely a morphing, ever-changing lineup of contributors to AP these days, which is great.
So let me ask you then, from someone who was born after 1990, to me, Alternative Press has just been one of those publications that's always been there as a music journal publication. So for you, at what point, from having actually ceased publication, what point did you feel you had made it?
What was the question? At what point?
Yeah, like when did you finally say, okay, we're an established entity, we're no longer trying to fight off all these guys to prove who we're worth, we are Alternative Press?
You want the honest truth? It was last year. Because we're an independent company, so we're not owned by anybody big, and we're not somebody's tax write-off, and we have no philanthropy or anything else like that. And so we've always been very subject to whatever the seas waves kind of came over the bow, speak. So some years it was kind of easy going. The mid-2000s were like that, when emo kicked it big time, and then snow and all that, and as well as like the industrial era back in the early 90s, and again when alt rock really started to kind of go mainstream in the about 95 to 97 in there. But there's been plenty of times where it's been really difficult, and there's been a bunch of things. Like, one of the things we've always been against this is that, let me say this, I'll preface this. If the AP had ever moved to New York City or LA, we would have been out of business years ago, because the cost overhead to operate in those cities is incredible. Even with all the networking and relationships we could have had, it still wouldn't have mattered. We would have been gone like probably the mid-90s latest. So being in Ohio and Cleveland, even with Ohio being kind of like down in the dumps at times economically and that, it's actually allowed us to survive all these recessions and so forth that happened throughout the years. So, but what it actually did also is it kind of it kept us from being in the LA and New York City entertainment bubbles, where everybody who's seen everything has seen everything, and so they're cynical in that sense. So in the Midwest, and you guys know this, Columbus is one of the biggest test markets in the country. So if a retail chain or restaurant chain wants to try to see what average Americans are going to think about it, they go to Columbus area and they put up a test place. And then they see how everything goes in. They test it all out. And then they go, if it works in that area, it's going to work in the rest of the country. So that's kind of how music's been. Kind of New York and LA people think, like we determine the trends, but it actually isn't the case. The stuff that actually ends up sustaining is the stuff that kind of gets picked up and starts carrying out in the Midwest area from here all the way out to, Colorado. And so we were able to kind of weed through a lot of the unreal trends and stuff like that, and flashes in the bands and so forth. And we were able to kind of stay in touch with what suburban alternative rock kids were always into, and that allowed us to kind of always kind of have our finger on the pulse and be a little bit ahead, in some cases very ahead, of Rolling Stone and Spin and all these other magazines that came and went over the years. So, but because we were in Cleveland, we were always looked down upon. So the big New York City and L.A. and Chicago entertainment critics and rock critics that worked at the papers and the magazines and worked at MTV and stuff always kind of dismissed us because they said, well, they're in Cleveland. They're not in New York. So if you're not in New York, then you're not part of us. You're not part of the crowd, so you can't be taken seriously. And the second thing on it was, and this really happened when when Fall Out Boy and My Chem and Paramore and all that stuff came out, is that they kind of dismissed us as being a teenage magazine, and we were all Hot Topic and Warped Tour. And they were all kind of like, oh, it's just teenage magazine. You can't take them seriously. Like, you have to be writing about, Coldplay and Muse and all these other bands. And they're all great, and all these hipster bands. And so all these people are like, oh, the hipster bands and all these stuff like that, indie rock bands in the second half of the 2000s. And the funny thing is that all those people now, most of them are out of work. They all got laid off, or their publications shut down, or their publications went online, and now they can't get paid because most of these sites online don't pay. So, so our magazine is literally, besides Rolling Stone, the only American. It's one of the last. Like, we're the number 2 American music magazine in the country that isn't a gear magazine like Guitar World or something like that. And so, and it's because of our demo. And it's because we appeal to music fans. And so we've never really been taken seriously. And it wasn't until we did the APMAs last year, and it blew up online, and all of a sudden it made us a stamp. And then all of a sudden we noticed all these people in the industry saying, I grew up reading AP. Like, AP was my magazine, and yeah, I moved on, and I work at the, wherever, Village Voice, or I work over at MSNBC or whatever, but AP's my magazine, and when I look at AP, I either A, feel old because I don't recognize any of the bands, or B, it takes me back to my youth. And so there was a lot of nostalgia that kicked in last year for us, and it was the first time we actually felt like, wow, we made it. Like, wow, because everybody was writing, even Billboard was writing, saying, like, AP is like one of the last music magazines in the country. And to us, we never thought about that. Like, we're in Cleveland, and we're busting our butts, and we're putting out this magazine and this crazy website, and we're building our YouTube experience stuff, and we have an award show, and we're doing all these other things now, and it's pretty crazy. And so we literally didn't really start to stop for a second and realize that we kind of survived and made it until last year. Out of the 29th of the 30 years we've been around was when we finally kind of went, oh, wow. So if you can believe that.
That's really cool. So what inspired you to start the APMAs? We went last year. We had a really great time. We live tweeted the whole thing. And it was just really great because it was, like 20 minutes away from my house. So, like, what inspired that?
Well, it's kind of like a community as a whole. This whole Warped Tour AP crowd is not taken seriously by the majority of the music industry. They kind of see, like, oh, those little teenage bands, and they're doing their punk rock stuff and whatever that is. Like, it's not Taylor Swift. It's not Mumford & Sons. It's not something that's playing at Bonnaroo. And so it can't be considered legitimate, Mm-hmm. And so, but the funny thing is that the bands that are in this community are making more money than the bands that all the hipster kids are into because of merch. Because the kids that are into these bands are wildly dedicated. Most people that are into indie rock and stuff like that love to go see the band at a show and buy some beers. Maybe they'll buy the vinyl, and that's it. And it's an economics thing. There's nothing more broke than a male in his mid-20s. And so if you're a band that's appealing to a male in his mid-20s, get ready to be poor. And unless you get lucky enough and you can break out and get into that higher echelon. And but if your demo is 18 years old and a lot of that money's coming from parents, or the kids don't have rent yet, or they don't have health insurance or a car payment, they have expendable income. And at that age, 17, 16, 18, musicians are your idols. They are your gods, and you live off of song lyrics. You get them tattooed on you. You write. You know everything about your favorite band member. You have posters all over your walls and stuff like that. And it may seem kind of like trite and kind of dismissive, but it isn't, because the fans of this music at that age, it can influence them in positive ways so much. And so for us, our whole community, it can kind of get back to your question, it had been kind of dismissed. And so we needed to have something for us. Most of our community kind of maybe saw each other on maybe New York City or LA Warped Tour dates, but we never really had a party for all of us. And South by Southwest has been skewing away from our community more and more every year. It's kind of just for pop and hip-hop now. So we kind of felt like we need to kind of honor everybody in our community, and we need to make one party. We need to make a party where everybody from all over the years can come and hang out. So we can get people that we wrote about in the 80s. We can get people that started the whole movements in the 70s and late 60s. We can get new bands playing with older bands. We could just one giant party for all of us misfits. And if the mainstream, like the big media and all these people want to come, that's awesome. So a couple of years ago, I thought of the idea of this award show, and so we were considering doing it in 2013, but we weren't ready. And so we needed a little bit more time to kind of get our act together, and then we announced it at the end of 2013, and we started talking about it then, like getting really serious, and then we announced it in January 2014. And it was just long overdue. Everybody just embraced it. They said, wow, like we really needed this. So many of the VIPs and the bands that weren't performing, actually some of the bands that were performing even, showed up either the day before the show for some of the rehearsals or the day of the show, because a lot of the bands were on Warped Tour. And Warped Tour came in the morning of the show. And they didn't know, they thought it was going to be a small banquet. And they showed up, and it's this huge stage in a 10,000 capacity park. And I remember some of the managers for like Paramore and stuff, kind of like, okay, this is very big. So everybody was completely stoked, and all I asked was that you got to dress up. You can't just get off of your tour bus in your PJs and your booty and walk in with your sunglasses, your neon sunglasses on, and your plastic cup full of PBR. So you got to dress up. And so there's a bunch of bands, plenty of bands that were on the way from the previous day's Warped Tour date and stopped at malls and bought suits. And so they all showed up, and it worked. The bands loved it because they got to see friends they hadn't seen in years. Brendan Urie's like texting out that he got to hang out with people that that opened up for him, or he opened up for like 5 years ago, and he hadn't seen since then. And so it just turned into one giant party, and it just worked. It just worked. So we trended worldwide on Twitter for 24 hours at number one, and we trended on Facebook, and we just blew up everywhere. And it was the biggest experience our AP's ever done, and it literally took me 2 weeks to even kind of get back down, like get a sense of reality. I was a walking zombie. I was so wiped out. We all were, and so so that's why we did it. We needed something for us, and kind of go back to what I previously said. We had so many of those people that worked at the New York Times and worked at the New York Daily News and LA Times and LA Weekly and stuff, who grew up reading AP, and they embraced it, and they said, like, this is awesome, like this magazine I grew up reading in high school, and they just threw a huge award show that tons and tons and tons of kids on Twitter and Facebook said was better than the Grammys. So even though it was a pretty rough show at spots, because we never had a walkthrough that whole show. We never did a rehearsal of the whole show.
You never did a rehearsal?
We literally show together that day. So if you look at it now online, it looks a little rough in spots, and that's why. That orchestra of 110 kids learned all of those pieces 2 days prior to the show. They only had 2 days rehearsal to put that all together. And those kids were amazing, absolutely amazing, that they pulled all that off. So, and they stayed up there without a potty break for 4.5 hours.
Wow.
So, you can just tell in my voice, like I'm reliving it while I'm speaking it right now. It was a really intense night.
Yeah, it was really great, and it seemed to go so well, but you said there were some parts that were a little iffy. What do you plan on doing differently for this year's APMAs?
Not doing it in a park. That's one. We completely lucked out. It was raining the day before that show. And we had nowhere to take the show if it rained the day of the show. So it was actually Kevin Lyman of Warped Tour. I was panic attacks all weekend, the weekend before the show. I was panic attacks because it was raining. It was really raining on Sunday.
Well, that's Cleveland.
And so it was raining. It was Saturday was the day it was really raining, and then Sunday it dried up, and because the show was Monday, and so Kevin Lyman told me, he's like, it's going to be fine. And I'm like, how can you say that? Like, I'm looking at my Weather Channel app, and it's saying it's going to probably rain on the day of the show. And he's like, no, it's not going to rain. You got like 4% chance. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he told me about his website, and it's called Wonderground, and I want to make sure I'm saying the right website actually, and wonderground.com, and what it is like this aggregator of all these different websites and government agencies and so forth and weather networks, and it puts them all together, and it puts together probably the most detailed weather forecast down to the hour. And so Kevin Lyman uses this on Warped Tour. And so that's how he always knows, this is like his wizardry, he always knows that when it's really going to rain and not rain, and not kind of going off of whatever one particular source says, and you freak out. And so I looked at it, and sure enough, it was down to the day of the show, and it was down to like 4% rain, and it was going to be partly cloudy that day. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So we get to the day of the show, and it's sunny all day, and perfect night, and everything. But we lucked out. So we don't want to be in a park anymore. And it was also a ton of work because we basically put a award show inside of a festival in a park, and that created double the work. And so we said, no more, we're taking it indoors. Even if we don't even sell out the place, we don't care, we're taking it indoors, because it'll free up our time a lot, because we can just hire people at that venue to do concessions, and they can worry about the bathrooms and all this other stuff like that, and we don't have to pull all these permits and things and deal with the city getting approval on that. So but the city of Cleveland really got activated this time because they realized that they had kind of missed an opportunity. And so they're very behind the APMAs this time. They're talking about making an APMAs week here in Cleveland, and there's a bunch of plans right now that are being formulated around town that's going to activate the whole city, kind of what happened with the gay games up here, where like you could go anywhere in town and there's something to do with that event. And so we're doing it at the Q, and it's going to be amazing. And the bands and the show and everything are just, we have to take it up another level now. And so having it indoors allows us to control the lighting and sound a lot better than we did last year. We had a big problem last year because the wind was blowing, and so the sound was being blown actually over into the lake and not onto part of the crowd. So anyway, so that's part of it, but we're going to be mirroring some of the things that really worked well last year, where we kind of have, classic artists play with newer artists, and having kind of medleys and so forth, so on. I know the overture to the show, the orchestra playing the songs of the year, is going to be double the length, and they're also taking a whole month to rehearse now, which is going to be great. And that's just some of it right now. I can't talk about any of the artists yet, because we're actually right smack in the middle of all that. But we do have Jack Barricat and Alex Gaskarth, the lead singer and the guitarist, co-singer for All Time Low, as the new hosts this year. And they are very much, they're great with improvisation, and they're just funnier than anything, and the band is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so them coming on and hosting the show this year is going to be pretty crazy fun. So it'll be Wednesday, July 22nd. At the Q in Cleveland. It'll be the red carpet before it, and we're actually talking about adding a little bit more things out in that area in front of the Q before the red carpet starts, and then we're doing a VIP only huge after party at the Rock Hall afterwards, which will be being bigger than last year. So it's going to be a great experience for us. Really great.
Well, I know last year you had mentioned, well, actually, you just mentioned that you had a bunch of classic artists performing with modern artists, and I really loved seeing Joan Jett perform. I'd never seen Joan Jett before, and it was just incredible. She's, I don't know how old she is, but a lot older than a lot of the more modern acts, and she's up there and she's giving it her all, and it was one of my favorite performances of the night. So creating a performance like that was just incredible.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a lot of work getting these moments to work out, and sometimes you get some of these big artists, classic artists, that want to play with new bands and play with new artists and try new things, and you have other ones that don't want to. They think it makes them look bad, like they're playing beneath them, and which is wrong. And so we really are encouraging it, and we're now that we actually have one show under our belt and we have something that is video that we can send to some of these people and say, see, this is what we're doing. We're already starting to kind of get a better response now this time. So now some of these artists and their managers and so forth can see they can see the performances and go, oh, that's what you're doing. Ah, that looks really great. You had a really great response to that, et cetera. So thanks for that. Yeah, it was definitely a lot of work. A lot of work. Some of those performances didn't even come together until the week before the show. Like, we didn't even know what Fall Out Boy we're going to be doing until 3 days before the show.
Wow.
So what does your day look like? What does your daily activities look like when you're planning for the APMAs versus when you're not planning for the APMAs?
I'm putting together we have this monthly magazine that we still do, and that's always a lot of innovative work now, because in print is becoming print is vinyl. So it's not going to go away. It's just becoming cooler, and there's less of it, but it's a lot more collectible. And so it's allowing us to kind of do a lot of fun things with the packaging and how we design things and the kind of content we put in print. And then online is just crazy. It's just nonstop, 24/7. Everybody's fighting each other, and so everybody's trying to outdo each other. And you're competing with, like in print, we're not competing with Rolling Stone. Online, we're competing with Rolling Stone for the Fall Out Boy interview or whoever. So it's a different beast, and so that's always loads of fun. And then trying to fit, like, we have 30 years worth of archives, and probably everything from 2005 back isn't anywhere. It's not online. We have no digital format of it. And so we're sitting here talking, like, what do we do with our digital archives? Before Spin print side went down, they took all of their past issues and put them up on Google Books for free. There's a lot of debate in the publishing industry about whether or not you try and do some sort of, you can view 5 articles for free, and then you pay for whatever with your archives, which is kind of like what the New York Times does, and or do you just put it all up for free, or do we kind of put it in digital magazine formats and try and make money off of it? Like, there's so many different ways you got to do it, and so we're doing some research right now and polling with our readers to kind of see, like, what would they do with our archives, and what should we do with it? So that's like a big thing right now for us that we're doing. And you got to constantly change everything in digital. So you put out a mobile app, well, then you got to redo your mobile app every 6 months because people get tired of it. They want to look at something different. So right now we're redesigning our entire website and our mobile version of our website, and so that all has to be up and done and ready by the time we do the nomination announcements in mid-March. So that's also consuming part of my day right now. So it's a lot of work, a lot of work. As you can see, I'm still at work right now, or here.
So when you're not working, do you ever go see any shows? Like, maybe you don't go see shows now, but in the past, you've lived in Cleveland probably your whole life. So what's your favorite Cleveland venue?
I really don't have a Cleveland venue, and if I did say I have a Cleveland venue, I couldn't tell you it because then I would just cause issues. But Cleveland actually has each one of the venues, the good thing about Cleveland is that there's really nobody that competes directly with anybody. Everybody's venues is slightly different, has a slightly different fan base. So everybody's unique, and that's what's great about Cleveland. The Grog Shop's fan base and size is very different than the Beachlands. The Beachlands is very different than Now That's Class. Now you have Mayhall's, the bowling alleys, getting involved in that, and that's a very different experience. You got House of Blues, you've got Nautica, the big stuff at Live Nation places. The Cleveland Agora is a very different experience now. Mm-hmm. So it's great because everywhere you go is a different type of audience, a different type of genre of music is playing there, and a different type of experience, period. So I really don't have a favorite place. All of them got, like, to be totally honest with you, there isn't one place that I really get sick of. Which I'm very lucky. I still go to shows. I'm not, like, retired in that sense. I've got plenty of friends that are in these bands, and I go and I hang out with them, and I get to catch up and stuff, and we talk shop and everything. So, but I have been trying to force myself to remember to kind of go see some bands that I don't need to go see that I like. So when I started AP, I was always a big Smiths fan, and so last year Johnny Marr played the Grog Shop, and I paid a ticket, didn't ask for a guest list, not like that. I was old school and paid for my ticket, went in there, did not ask to go meet him backstage, didn't try and do the VIP experience, just enjoyed it like a fan, sang along to all the Smith songs, and I left, and I was on cloud nine at that point. It was so great to go to a show and not have to work it and just have fun. So that's what I do.
So how do you think the Cleveland music scene has changed since you started AP, and where do you think it's going to go?
I think it's going to grow a lot faster and stronger in many different ways and through many different genres, all the different genres, I think, because you guys probably know this maybe, but Ohio went through a brain drain during the 2000s. A lot of people moved out of state, and so we lost a lot of our creative types. Kids were graduating college and then leaving because there weren't any jobs here, and the cities really weren't that hip. Columbus was doing pretty hot at that time, and Cleveland was in the toilet, and so it was really difficult. And then reinvestments started to happen into the cities by some of these mayors and getting some money from the state and from the government primarily. And so these cities started to rebuild themselves with becoming tech hubs and medical hubs and things like that. And now in Cleveland, I've been living in Cleveland since 1993, and like Cleveland proper, downtown, and it has never been this vibrant. I mean, Cleveland has made probably about a dozen places you have to go visit, places that must be on your must-travel-to vacation spots lists in the past 2 months, from like Condé Nast Traveler, New York Times, to another one just came out from Popular Science magazine saying that Cleveland is one of the best places for innovation, like a hub of innovation where you go and you want to do a startup and you want to like kind of get things moving. This is where you go. Cleveland's a great place for chefs to get their training and to kind of build themselves as a name, and then so I've never seen Cleveland this hot right now, and what's doing it is the college kids that graduate are staying, and so the age range in this town used to be maybe 7 years ago. It would be you kind of go up about 23, and then the graduation after college, and it would drop significantly, and then there'd be a spike up in probably the early 40s where people were getting married or already had kids or something like that. But everybody in there that was like single or in that age where they're getting married and stuff were gone. They were all moved. So that group is now staying here, and they're investing in Cleveland, and they're starting businesses, and they're starting bands, and that's there's the whole creative class now. So we have more art galleries than we ever had. There's more artists here. There's more bands that are starting up of all different types of genres, and that's great. So now I'm hearing Columbus is really hurting. So Cleveland is like hopping like crazy right now, and I think the fun, great part about it is that I've got friends in Pittsburgh who are battling with my friends here in Cleveland over whose town is hotter right now. Both towns, Pittsburgh and Cleveland, have always had the biggest problem, and that is bad PR. They've had the worst public relation campaigns I've ever seen, and they just did not know how to sell themselves. And now they're on a trek, and it's going great. And I think the Cleveland music scene is going to be more vibrant now than it's been in probably 30 years. So I'm really excited.
I'm really excited about that too. I'm from like the Strongsville, Berea area, and there's
Baldwin Wallace and all that.
Yeah, all the high schoolers over there, they're really into ska music right now. So it's really funny because then you get ska, and they'll meet up with their friends who are like really punk, and it's a really great time, and I can't wait till they get older and they can do more things, like directly in Cleveland, you know?
Right, exactly. So, and you can start a band now because there's an audience to see them.
Yep.
So.
There's house shows all the time.
Right, exactly. So it's a great time to be in Cleveland. It's a great time to start. It's actually, you know, when you can tell a town's turn around is when the dating scene gets better. And I always say, like, you know, friends of mine are like, oh, I'm moving to, L.A. because the gene pool's more. And I'm like, you don't need to do that now. And the fact, here's the thing: you move out to L.A. and it's like, I've got so many friends in New York City the same way. You go there and there's another person that's going to interest you every other block. And in Cleveland, it's like if you want to kind of grab somebody and like make sure you're not have to get in competitive matches with trying to steal away your beau. Like that's what's so great about these Midwest cities. There's not a lot of people out here, so there's not a lot of people to do that with. So it's kind of like you don't have to worry about competition, per se, in the dating world. So.
Definitely. So I just wanted to thank you for your time. This was a really great talk.
Thanks for letting me chat your ear off and talk a mile a minute. People probably have to re-listen to this to catch it all. So.
Well, I loved it. Appreciate your insight.
Sure. We're going to be making the announcements for the show in March, so the nominees, and that will be there, and all the ticket information and so forth. So, and they'll be over on altpress.com, and follow our Instagram and our Twitter, and like us on Facebook. It's all there. You'll be staying on top of everything as the months kick in. So,
I can't wait to see what you've got planned. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, guys. You have a good night. All right.
You too.
All right, bye.